Alright, we are pushing 8 o'clock, so let's just go ahead and get right back into it, shall we? Welcome back, everyone. This is our 6th day of reading from Archblade, Legend of the Defiler. Last time we'd gotten a bit of a peek behind the curtain, seeing what the big bad is up to. Had another encounter with Adura, who once again skidded off. Probably to be seen again later. We'll see whether or not he'll meet his match finally in this book, in this reading, or if he'll continue to be a pain in the butt for ever and always. Seems like there's always a room for a recurring villain. Or maybe we'll defy tropes and put an end to him once and for all. We'll find out probably either today or tomorrow, considering, well, judging by the pace we're going, we've got probably 2 days left of reading. We usually get a little bit more than 10% through each of these sessions, and we have just south of 20% left of the book. So we are getting down toward the end. We're pushing toward the climax, and we will see where the big conclusions for this story lie, and what will be left to be unraveled later. So, with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and just get right back into it. We left off last time after they'd sorted out the magic space nukes, found the attuned frequency for essence magic and applied it to their neutron bombs, or neutron charges. There's a whole lot of space science going on there, and I'm going to trust the author that they're in the neighborhood. Neutron stars are cool, but exotic matter's weird. So, let's go ahead and jump right back into things now with Chapter 23 of Archblade, Legend of the Defiler. Despair is a constant enemy. Its only weakness is to remind yourself that others are counting on you to keep going. it's the author's prerogative to take liberties. It's science fiction, not hard science. That's one of the key points that I've always honed in on. You can have some grounding in real science, but it doesn't need to be absolutely anchored to it. I like to think of like Michael Crichton, where a lot of the science sounds reasonable, but it doesn't exactly work the way it does in the books. That's what makes them fun. That's fiction's all about that, right? Okay. On the second day, the Forerunner was at the designated meeting place. Angel stood on the bridge and studied the details of the ship, feeling a sense of pride at all they had accomplished in such a short time. The ship's hull was reinforced by 76% through the Earth frequency. The impulse function of the Nova Drive's efficiency and maneuverability were improved by almost 50% each from the air frequency. The weapon system's power output from the fire frequency had nearly doubled. Even the water frequency had been a surprising boon. At first, Lily ran it through the hydroponics bay with some success, but Ochran's guess had proven to be its most significant use. By routing it through the drive room, they could better stabilize the temperature of the Nova Drive. It would still have to be tested to find out what that meant, but the idea that it could help once they got off the planet made Angel smile to herself as she went over the numbers one more time. She glanced over at Lark, who hadn't stopped fidgeting. She had tried and failed to get him to open up about his encounter with the Unbound, and each time ended in him shutting down. With every hour they drew closer to the battle, the more she was willing to leave it be for now. They were awaiting communications from the leaders of Durance. This was to be the start of an informal meeting to come to a consensus before finalizing plans. Lark raked his fingers through his hair and sighed repeatedly. Just as she was about to voice her concern that he was worrying too much, the view screens popped on. The massive picture split into 3 parts, each with its own leader. Reka, I haven't seen you. Reka, I haven't seen you since you were little and squeezing the life out of your baby critter. You're leading an army now? Beltaz grinned. The young Treekin woman smirked and inclined her head in greeting. That was the start of a wonderful relationship between Viera and myself, actually. Now I'm in charge of training the Bonded and their riders, and it is my honor to lead my people's forces. Good, Beltaz clapped. We need more youth in this fight. Reka appeared comforted by the welcome before shifting her gaze to Drawson, and her tone turned somber. I was sorry to hear about your father, Drawson. Has your pact recovered? Death is no stranger to us, he acknowledged. However, discovering the Conclave's corruption among our people rattled us for the better part of a day. That long? Angel inquired dubiously. Barely. Afterward, I had so many warriors volunteering to fight I had to draw lots to determine who would stay behind to guard our children. His eyes gleamed with pride. That's the opposite problem we have with Sosaria. Lorik shook his head dejectedly. Speaking of which, I got a message from Tessindra earlier today. She'll be joining us with 10,000 troops, 100 battle striders, and the entire company of Archblades, Beltaz announced with unbridled joy. Lark's jaw dropped. How did she manage that? Something about an investigation into the council and troubling evidence coming to light, the Lord of Stone recited from his report. She didn't want to go into details until she arrived. Lark staggered back until his legs hit something behind him, and he practically fell into Ochran's chair. Angel's eyes glimmered with amusement, knowing that the captain wouldn't mind so long as he didn't make it a habit. That just leaves us to coordinate our battle strategy. Reka folded her arms and looked between her own screens and the other leaders. We have no idea how to incorporate magic into our battle tactics, so we are prepared to follow whatever orders are needed, Drawson affirmed. Sounds as though we need a leader, Angel observed. What about Tessindra or Saren? Lark couldn't stifle his snort of derision at the mention of his former commander, but immediately he schooled his expression into one of serious contemplation. Alas, they know nothing about our capabilities, Reka replied with a shake of her head. We need someone who can coordinate everyone, and since this is my first time out of the forest, I wouldn't know where to start with the rest of you. That leaves me out, Beltaz sighed. I know Sosarian troops as well as my own, but I haven't had enough time to study everyone else's tactics. Lark felt his heart speed up as a dreaded possibility arose. How about Ochran? He has a military history, he blurted out. Angel immediately refuted his suggestion. The captain would never agree to lead another planet's forces. We are here to fight and support, but it's not our place to decide things. Then what about the Defiler? Valdez proclaimed with a nod of certainty. What? No, Lark stammered. He's the obvious choice, Drawson agreed. Stop! I can't just... Lark stood, his mind reeling as he tried to interrupt. Then it's decided. He will lead us into battle, Rhaegar proclaimed with a grin. A chilling silence fell over the room. The three leaders waited for Lark to acknowledge them with faces full of joy, hope, and determination. As the quiet stretched on, Angel realized there was something terribly wrong. Lark had gone completely still, and his head was bent low. Then, without warning, he slammed his fist down on the console, ending the group transmission. When his hand receded, it revealed a small crack had bloomed on the casing. Before Angel could speak, he stormed out of the room, leaving her stunned in his wake. Okay, quick aside. Trying to come up with 5 distinct voices is a challenge. I am not exactly a voice actor here, but I hope it comes through, can kind of identify who's talking. When she found him, he was sitting on the edge of his bed, with his head in his hands. His shoulders shook, and she could hear him whispering to himself. Lark, what's wrong? She asked, as she tried to keep her voice still. I can't do it, he answered quietly, his face still covered. Why? You know their strengths and weaknesses. You know the Conclave better than any of us. You should lead us. And she attempted to reassure him. She reached out to caress his shoulder. I can't, Lark cried as he suddenly stood from the bed, unintentionally knocking her hand away and looming over her. She saw the bloody trail of tears that dripped from his chin and stained his collar. His eyes were filled with agony and anger. His entire body seemed to quake as he tried to hold himself together, but she could practically feel him breaking inside. Why don't you talk to me and tell me what's wrong? I don't know what I can do to help, but at least I can listen, she offered softly. He stood frozen for a moment as he processed her request. As seconds turned to minutes, he still said nothing, but she patiently waited for him to reply. I don't deserve it, he finally admitted, his voice strained. Deserve what? She asked. I don't deserve their praise or acceptance, and they shouldn't let me lead them, he answered bleakly. He gasped, almost pained, and rubbed his face vigorously. She watched as he turned his back to her and confessed in a voice barely above a whisper. Darkos contacted me right after my parents died. Her heart sped up, and her eyes went wide. No one told us about that. No one knows. I've never told anyone about it, until now. He leaned against the desk with his hands splayed on the dark wood. He took a steadying breath and continued. I came across an abandoned facility. One Darkos had left intentionally for me to find, so he could leave me a message. It said that he knew about how I was treated in Sosaria. He had eyes there and had been watching me grow up. Evidently, he was impressed with how I had turned out. Sounds like he was trying to manipulate you, Angel growled. Obviously, he replied with a bitter laugh. He made another plea for me to join them, saying it was only a matter of time until they won anyway. He swallowed hard and closed his eyes tightly. He told me that I was created to lead their armies, and that it was my destiny. Her mind reeled at the implication, but Lark continued before she could say anything. His voice became more frantic as he spoke. I always thought Darkos forced himself on my mother, but he told me the truth. She was artificially impregnated. I was created from their combined biological material in a laboratory like one of their experiments, then infused with entropy magic before my mother even started to carry me. How can you be sure? Maybe he was trying to lie or manipulate you more, she offered. It was all there, he roared and whipped around to face her. All of it. His voice broke, and he sank to his knees. The files, the reports, every last shred of data about my creation was laying on a table for me to find. Unable to contain herself any longer, she closed the distance between them. She was desperate to hold him and comfort him somehow. As her fingers grazed his hair, his hands shot up and held her wrists still. Don't you get it? I'm barely better than the other monsters they created, he sobbed, pulling her hands against his forehead. I can't lead an army. I can't do what he created me for. Angel knelt, so they were at eye level. So, this is why you reacted the way you did when you used entropy magic. I hate that it's a part of me, and I hate that I had to use it, he muttered in a voice laced with despair. How have you kept this to yourself this whole time? Angel asked, feeling her own tears start to fall. He shrugged numbly. I fight. I follow orders. I kill. And I never had to worry about anyone relying on me to do anything else. We rely on you, Lark. We've done so since we met you, she reminded him. He sighed. I know. Helping to protect the ship and having you with me are the only things that have kept me going through all this. She carefully considered her next words, then, gently, took one of his hands and drew it up to her lips. He watched intently as she kissed his fingers and asked, Lark, do you still love me? What? Of course I do. Nothing could change that, he insisted, squeezing her hand. Are you sure? Even though I get overwhelmed, can be difficult, or sometimes have trouble with my anxiety, she continued. Yes, I'm sure, he responded fiercely, his eyes pleading for her understanding. Which means you accept everything about me, even parts you disagree with. She stroked his cheek. Yes, Angel, I don't know what you're getting at, but he was interrupted as she placed a finger on his lips. Then, you have to accept that when I say that I love you too, that means you are a person worthy of love. She smiled sadly. Your anger, your past, your magic, everything about you is worthy of my love. But Darkos, he stammered. Doesn't matter, she interrupted. As she dropped her hand and put it on his chest, feeling his racing heart under her palm. This is what matters. The decisions you make as a person to help others, or to risk your life to do what's right. She leaned forward so her forehead rested against his. Your abilities don't define who you are. Your choices do. He kissed her hands reverently as he slowly stood. He gazed at her with resigned sadness and simply said, I'm sorry. She sat silently and watched him leave. His deep-seated hate for his magic, and no doubt about his identity, had rocked her to the very core. She felt as though he bore his soul to her, and she knew that she had to figure out a way to help make him whole. When she reached her room, she was unsurprised that he wasn't there. As much as it saddened her, she knew he would avoid her and the others until he had subdued his fears again. Shutting the door behind her, she groaned and thought about how a long shower sounded wonderful. Under the comforting heat of the jets, Angel hummed to herself as she lathered up her hair. Her mind turned to Lark again, and how she could reach him when she suddenly froze. A wild, unhinged thought raced through her mind. It was crazy beyond measure for her, and she never in her life thought she would do such a thing. However, Lark inspired her so much that she had to try to do the same for him. She tore out of the bathroom, soap still dripping down her neck, and went to her closet. Throwing the door open, she found her target almost instantly, and shakily began to form her most inventive plan ever. Hours later, the sun had set, and the 4 leaders were on board. Akron greeted them personally, with Lauren and Maya. He hadn't seen Lark since before the meeting, and judging by the strained expressions on the leaders' faces, he worried it hadn't gone well. A small reception had been arranged so everyone could dine together and finalize plans for the battle ahead. Tarn had set out a sumptuous buffet that consisted of dishes from the various factions, and Akron ate heartily with Beldaz while they discussed contingencies for cover fire the Stonekin might need for getting their tanks in place. Maya, Reka, and Drossen were poring over a map of the Deadlands around Lifesaver that the Archblades had provided. They were planning where to set up medical encampments to take the wounded soldiers from the battlefield. We don't have many skills with animals, Maya cautioned as she bit her lower lip. I don't know how we might treat your bonded if something were to happen. Reka shook her head and replied with a cocky grin, Our bonded are wickedly fast. I would be shocked if we had a single casualty. Between the bonded and us healing from the blight, the treekin are once again a force to be reckoned with, Reka proclaimed. Her exuberance was infectious. Maya turned to Drossen and eyed her and raised an eyebrow with a silent question. He bowed his head respectfully and answered, We have our own healers for the end of the battle. Until then, just kick our hides back out there. We'll be fine. Maya looked flabbergasted, and Reka burst out laughing. My grandfather told us stories about the Ravagers being such great hunters. What do you say to a little healthy competition tomorrow? What did you have in mind? Drossen inquired, his head cocked and his full attention fixated on the young woman. The first one to touch Lifesaver with their bare hands wins one of Beldaz's casks, she wagered. Hey! Beldaz squawked indignantly from Akron's side. Drossen's eyes gleamed with delight as he reached his hand forward to clasp the one Rika had extended. Deal. However, we should at least share some with our companions. It is only fair. That's better, Beldaz grumbled and returned to the conversation at hand without missing a beat. Across the room, Lily sidled up next to Reynard against the wall of the mess hall. It feels extremely foolish to bet on such a thing. That's essentially agreeing on a death sentence, she sighed as she sipped her tea. They're aware, Reynard murmured. Lily blinked up to him in surprise. His arms were folded, and he smiled sadly at the group, which had now grown to include Cassandra. They know the odds are they will be missing one or more of their numbers tomorrow, that it might be themselves that doesn't survive the day. So why? Because when hope starts to falter, camaraderie can help pull you back up, he replied. Akron approached the pair with an exasperated expression. Have you seen Lark or Angel? Lily and Reynard straightened up and shook their heads in unison, causing their captain to growl. Whenever Maya asks Angel when she'll be here, it's always soon. It's been soon for almost 3 hours now. Lark only responds that he needs rest and turned off his armlet. I don't know what's going on with those two. I saw him under his strider just before I came here, so I'm unsure what rest he's talking about, Reynard commented dryly. I have no idea. Who is that? Akron exclaimed when he caught sight of a woman in the entryway he didn't recognize. That's Angel, Lily whispered. Angel stepped lightly into the room. Immediately, everyone's eyes swiveled to her, but for once, she did not shrink under their gazes. Her normal bun had been foregone in favor of flowing freely. Her golden hair was at its full length, just past her shoulders, and shimmered in the light. Instead of her usual uniform, she wore a figure-hugging gown that stopped at her ankles. She made a single scan of the room, and judging by the look on everyone's faces, it was exactly as she expected. Akron's hand shot out, and he grabbed Reynard's shoulder. Go get Lark, he ordered, and tell him that it's not negotiable this time. The tactical officer ran out of the room, but not before giving Angel a big grin and salute. Lily went to talk to Angel, and Maya found herself at Akron's side. She's stunning, Maya observed. I didn't even recognize her at first. What do you think she's doing, dressed like that? Akron asked as he wound his arm around Maya's waist. Considering this is the eve of battle, and the man she loves is at the center of this, I'd say she's doing something drastic, Maya answered, resting her head on his shoulder. A loud grousing could be heard from the hallway, and within seconds, Lark was being led almost forcibly by an amused Reynard. He glowered as he glanced around the room, but when his eyes landed on Angel, he froze in his tracks. His arms had been folded, then relaxed them to his sides as he slowly approached her. It was precisely the moment Angel was waiting for. She turned to the table behind her. It was empty, save for a few plates. Bastian stood beside her, still shocked by her appearance, and she held out a hand for him. Ever the gentleman, he helped guide her to stand on the tabletop so that she could look down at the entire room. Friends and fellow crew members, could I have your attention? She called out loudly to the room. Each person turned to face her with varying looks of confusion and curiosity. Angel took a deep breath, silently wondering if her heart would burst from her chest. Tomorrow is an important day for all of us. We will fight a terrible enemy and try to save this world from its clutches. So, in honor of everyone's bravery and valor, I decided to offer a gift, because I've grown to care for you all so very much. She looked around the room as she spoke, but her last words were said as her eyes locked with Lark's. With a deep, shaky breath, Angel opened her mouth and began to sing with all the passion in her heart. It had started as a poem she had written after meeting Lark and seeing him in battle. The past hours were spent fitting it to a beautiful melody she developed herself. It was about people who become heroes through selfless determination and fellowship. She had buried the voice in the back of her head that would normally terrify her and scream at her to stop. All she could think about was the music, how she felt as she formed the words, and the quiet hope that it reached everyone in the room. Her voice rang high as she hit the crescendo of the song. The verse was about despair and self-doubt being bitter foes that must be overcome. Despite how fast her heart beat, she felt oddly calm as she sang the words. Everything was coming out exactly as she had planned and rehearsed. She clutched her hands to her chest at the last lyrics. Final reminders that the deeds of heroes live on forever in the hearts and minds of the people they defend. As the last notes faded, the room erupted into applause. The leaders of Durance let out enthusiastic cheers of joy, while the crew of the Forerunners' reactions were a mixed range from the quiet shock of Tarn to enthusiastic cheering from Lauren. Angel gave a polite bow and held her breath, unsure what to do next. She didn't have to wait long, as Lark approached her in quick, desperate strides. He grasped her around the waist, lifted her off her feet, and swung her around while holding her to his chest. He then lowered her down so that their noses touched, and he took a few gasping breaths. He gave no thought to anyone else in the room. It was only her in his mind. That was incredible. I can't even describe it. How did you do that? He whispered, kissing her forehead and letting tears fall unashamedly down his face. I was driven by a need to inspire the people I care about, especially someone I love, who was lost. She brought up a hand and affectionately stroked his black hair. Lark shook his head in disbelief. Even though they had been through so much already, she still had ways to astonish him. Are you all right, lad? Belaz suddenly asked. He leaned in slightly and pointed at the blood running down Lark's cheeks. It's all right. Bloody tears are just part of having entropy magic, Angel explained without looking away from Lark's eyes. Nothing to worry about at all. Before anyone could interrupt them further, he pulled Angel into a corner of the room. He held her tightly once again and swayed as though the music was still playing, and the others decided to let the pair have the space to themselves. Akron heard a throat clear behind him and turned to see Cassandra motion for him to follow. She led him away from the main celebratory party and sat at an empty table. It all makes sense now, she stated when Akron took his place across from her. What do you mean? His entire life, Lark was haunted by his heritage. No matter what he did or how many lives he saved, people still saw him as Darkos' son. He was never fully welcomed among our people, she confessed. I noticed you and your father treated him well enough, Akron remarked. Yes, but despite our positions, it can only mean so much when he had to spend days among his fellow soldiers or citizens of our city. She winced at the memories. But with you and your crew, he has found a place where he is accepted for who he is. No conditions, no judgment, and more importantly, he found someone who loves him for everything he is. They truly bring out the best in each other, Akron observed, as he watched Lark and Angel take plates of food from Tarn. I noticed the same thing in Angel. I knew she was brilliant, but ever since they met, she has floored me with the incredible things she is capable of. Desindra smiled warmly. My father will be happy to know he is thriving with you and your crew. Akron's eyes narrowed at that. He didn't know the young monarch well, but he could still tell she had a deeper meaning to what she was saying. You don't expect him to return, he stated flatly, folding his arms. No, I do not. He has no family left in Sosaria. Ever since the loss of his parents, he has become more and more distant. You may think he was sent on long reconnaissance missions purely to get rid of him, but he volunteered for them more often than not, Desindra explained. Akron could only nod in understanding, thinking it made sense after getting to know the young man so well. Now, he has found a new home and a partner among your crew. Assuming we are successful tomorrow, will you allow him to leave with you? Her face was serene, but her voice was pleading. Akron chuckled. I have extremely high standards for the people that join this crew. As it so happens, he has surpassed them at every turn. So yes, we would welcome him to accompany us back home. Before Desindra could respond, Lark and Angel approached with arms around each other's waists. Lark enthusiastically grasped Desindra's hand with his free one. What are you doing here? He beamed, and gave her an affectionate side hug. After the council refused to send aid to the Stonekin, we conducted an investigation. Desindra's jaw clenched, and contempt dripped from her words. Thanks to Bastion's help translating some intercepted messages, we discovered 3 of the 7 members were Conclave agents. Those bastards! Lark's eyes flashed with anger before widening. Was Vamid one of them? Please tell me he was one of them. Akron snorted with barely contained laughter, and Taz shook her head almost regretfully. I'm afraid not. After the information came to light, we executed the agents and dissolved the council. How did he take that? Lark asked with a raised brow. Surprisingly well. He was terrified of being executed along with them, and we didn't dissuade him of that possibility at first. she added with a mischievous glint in her amber eyes. He was quite eager to cooperate and give power back to my father, all while insisting he barely knew the three men, despite all the time they spent together. Lark scoffed, tail tucked firmly between his legs, as usual. So, what happened after that? Angel asked. We contacted Beldaz to make amends for not coming to their aid. He said the best way would be to gather our army and join the fight against Darkos. So here we are. Desindra finished with a dramatic flourish. But why you instead of Various? Lark inquired. Desindra took a deep breath and spoke slowly. My father decided this was a perfect time for me to take an active role in leadership. You're technically speaking to the Queen of Sosaria. Lark exclaimed, My liege! I had no idea! He struck his arm out and bowed so low his forehead nearly touched his knee, prompting Desindra to roll her eyes and eliciting raucous laughter from the other two. She shoved him verbally to stand straight. Please, don't start with that. It's hard enough dealing with everyone else being unsure of how to talk to me. Reiko wouldn't stop going on about how cute of a queen I was. She explained in a tone of equal parts amusement and irritation. As though summoned by her name, the young tree woman approached the small group with Beldaz and Drossen trailing behind her. The rest of the crew had left for the night, leaving only the army leaders, along with Angel, Lark, and Akron. We wanted to apologize about earlier, Reiko implored, as she gently touched Lark's shoulder. We didn't mean to put you on the spot about leading the fight. Saren has volunteered to do it, Desindra added in a somber tone. That's a terrible idea. Lark's voice was calm and even. My own ego aside, he doesn't know enough about the battle tactics of everyone here. He took a deep breath and nodded to them all. I'll do it. You're certain? Drossen asked, his head cocked and his gaze appraising. Yes, he replied firmly, giving Angel's waist a squeeze and getting a determined smile from her in return. I needed help sorting some things out, but now I am certain. Good. Drossen closed his claws into fists over his chest in an X formation. We entrust our pack and our destiny to the Defiler. Reiko bowed deeply. We entrust our home and our future to the Defiler. Beldaz raised a fist. We entrust our families and our legacy to the Defiler. Desindra clasped her right hand and crossed it over her heart. We entrust our honor and our country to the Defiler. Lark watched each of their declarations, feeling a well of emotion filling his chest. He wished there was more time to give thanks to each of them for the faith they had showed in him, but time was running out, and plans needed to be made. That brings us to the end of chapter 23. So, it seems the Conclave was, well, we all knew it, but the Conclave was definitely behind the Council in Sosaria. 3 is enough to swing things, that's for sure. In a group of 7, 3 is... It doesn't need to be a majority to really twist public opinion, especially when probably the other 4 are not outright enemies of the state, but they're corrupt as all get out. So I could see it being not difficult to tip things in their way, especially if the face of the council was so easily convinced. So, but that's all well and done. Taz is now the queen of Sosaria and has brought their full force to bear with the alliance. All 4 of the powers are brought together, and the Forerunner is poised at the center. And Lark has accepted himself with some help from some surprising hidden talents from Angel. She kind of surprises me over and over for someone who was so lost in herself and locked in her own head at the beginning and explained as such a wallflower type. She's got a lot of emotional intelligence. I know a lot of it is growth throughout the story and the relationship with Lark really drawing her out, but it's kind of shocking how fast she's come out of her shell and shown everything that she's got, that she was holding her cards to her chest. So it is nice to see characters develop. Yeah, exactly. Because she, at the very start, she said all of 5 words in the first chapter, and it was a chapter from her viewpoint, but it was entirely in her head. She was kind of thinking more than speaking, which isn't bad, but when you're wrestling with your own inner demons the whole time and not able to express yourself, it's difficult. And then Lark came on the scene, and the two of them bettered themselves together, and you get sort of a shocking amount of growth from her in particular. Lark, we didn't really see too much from his perspective early on, so it was more an outsider's perspective. But he's had plenty of growth in accepting himself and coming to terms with his past and his current situation and what to do further on. But it's a good growth. Hey there, Dabuska. All right. Well then, let's go ahead and carry on now with chapter 24. From the beginning, many of us knew war was inevitable. Despite that, one could never truly prepare for it. The cool morning air blew into the cargo bay as the hatch opened. Lark's cloak whipped around him as he hugged Angel fiercely. After they had gone to bed, he spent the last few hours before dawn in Angel's arms, memorizing her features and feeling her heartbeat thunder beneath his hands. Neither one could sleep, so they resolved to spend every last second together. Now, ready for his departure, he checked his sword and strider for the last time, and once satisfied, he turned to her. I would tell you to be careful, but I know you better than that, she admitted, with a weak smile, and her eyes filled with unshed tears. Lark kissed her again, and nuzzled her cheek as he inhaled deeply. He wanted to carry any memory of her onto the battlefield that he could. I won't stop until each one of them is dead, and I'll do everything in my power to return to you. He straightened up and interlaced their fingers. What will you be doing? She allowed her tears to fall freely and cleared her throat. I'll be on the bridge at my console. I'm to relay communications between Akron and the leaders, and scan for changes on the battlefield. Good, he murmured. Just remember the plan and what signals to look for. Angel nodded. Although they had gone over the plan repeatedly, she knew he was reciting it again out of anxiety. Lark gently guided her chin upward, and he placed a single kiss on her lips. It didn't have the fervor she might have expected, but it was no less passionate than the ones from the previous night. Stay safe, he pleaded, resisting the urge to pull her into his arms again. She tried to smile, despite her fears. Angel responded, You as well. Lark said nothing, unable to make that promise, as he climbed into his strider. The hover engine kicked out a strong gust that ruffled Angel's hair. The new upgraded weapons hissed as steam escaped from the barrels from the fire magic frequency hitting the damp morning air. Every display had been refitted and enhanced thanks to the Forerunner's diligent crew, and he saw communication data from the ship as well as the other leaders. He hit the accelerator and sped from the cargo bay. Tearing her eyes away from his speeding strider, Angel closed the bay doors and bolted for the bridge. The time for crying was over, and now it was time to fight. When she entered the bridge, she saw Akron, Lauren, and Reynard, each at their own station. No one chastised her for her long goodbye. Instead, she received a sympathetic expression from each of them. All right, Akron began loudly. The communication ringing through the ship. Let's get started. It had been over an hour since dawn broke, but the world was still veiled in gloom. Lark stood on his strider and overlooked the battlefield from the stony outcropping he was perched on. An ominous storm brewed over Lifesaver, and the steel-gray clouds blocked any hope of sunlight. It was a fortress that spanned the Deadlands from coast to cliffs. The stone battlements were empty, and no flags were flying. It had been made haphazardly, with the smaller towers clustered and no two alike. The massive center tower rose highest and seemed ready to pierce the heavens. Lark knew that's where his father would be. However, nothing was large enough to account for the horde that stretched between it and their army. In the span of a city, every meter of the Deadlands was already covered with a sea of decayed and moaning undead. Rot giants stood as foreboding sentinels dotted throughout the troops, and bloodhunters screeched overhead in flocks that turned the sky wherever they flew pitch black. Yet the army was eerily still. It was as though the Conclave was attempting to demoralize the Allied army by flaunting their numbers. Stonekin steam tanks idled on the front lines, flanked by Sosarian battle striders. The second set of waves were Sosarian troops and Stonekin defenders. The Sosarians looked much smaller than their compatriots, who wore heavy armor and casually hefted massive weapons and shields over their arms. The last lines of defense were the Treekin archers, and those with their bonded mounts. The Forerunner hovered over them, relying on the archers' support to keep them safe from aerial attacks. Dotted throughout the lines were mages and archblades, prepared to heal corruption and provide support where needed. The Ravagers were split into 4 units and nimbly wove their way through the allies in preparation to hunt down necromancers. Lark felt a kernel of fear and panic threaten to take root in his heart. It was so much more than he had imagined. Without having to look around, he knew his allies felt the same dread. They also saw the numbers and the size of Lifesaver, and realized that it was a great structure atop endless catacombs filled with even more horrors. Taking a grounding breath, Lark opened a communication line with every troop and vehicle on the field. Then, he turned to face the coalition of factions, the enemy framed behind him, and his crimson eyes burning with determination. "It's terrifying, I know." His voice echoed through the field as the volume of his transmission was enhanced and carried over through air magic. "No one in our history has ever faced the full might of the Conclave, and no one has ever threatened Lifesaver directly. Their response is far greater than any of us could have imagined." He took a steadying breath and announced, "But you don't need to worry because you can just go home." He could almost feel tangible confusion from the entire army watching him. But he didn't wait for a response before continuing. "That's right! You could go home right now. Then, instead of facing them today, you can go and die comfortably in your homes. You can wait for them to come for you, your children, or your descendants, years from now, because, make no mistake, they will never stop." He raised the rebel's heart high in the air, a glowing beacon to draw the attention of everyone gathered, and shouted, "Or you can stay, and we can finally put an end to this madness. The Conclave has spent our entire history trying to kill us, destroy our homes, and dictate our fates. They claim to be death itself. But today, we can send them a message, one from every living being on Durance, that cries out as one, that we will defy death. We will defeat it. We will show them that with every drop of blood we spill, every ounce of strength we use to help each other, we will take back our world. And after today, we will not allow them to harm another innocent life." He shot a blast of essence magic into the air. The response was deafening with the yells, cries, shouts, and trills from the gathered force behind him. Obeying the signal, the Treekin archers drew back in unison and let fly arrows enhanced with air magic. Tiny dots of light pierced the clouds where the arrows had entered in precise lines. Suddenly, as though rending fine cloth, the sunlight violently cleaved the clouds apart, so only blue skies remained. A wild cacophony erupted from the Conclave army, as the undead reeled in the presence of natural sunlight. Lark lowered his blade and fired into the front line of Withered. They scattered, and with a roar that shook the ground, the army behind him charged. He leaped into his strider and surged towards a rot giant attempting to engage a steam tank. The monster braced itself, but wasn't prepared for Lark's new weapons. A single button press pelted the rot giant with dozens of small projectiles, and it staggered back with a gurgling groan. Lark had spent hours after the repair of his vehicle with Dravik and Reynard learning its new features, and they were about to pay off. He aimed his weapon at the center of the rot giant's chest, and fired just as he pulled up on the nose of his vehicle and ran over the top of it. With a mighty squelch, it blew apart beneath his hover treads, and he shot off to the next enemy. "He had me going for a bit there," Reynard admitted, his hands flying to the ship controls to open fire on the enemy army and start providing support to the other troops. "He certainly knows how to get everyone's attention," Ockran agreed. Telling them they could go home was a bold move, but he finished strong in the end. He sat in his chair, but new, smaller view screens were now flanking his console to give him full visuals of the enhanced systems. "Lord! A large group of enemy bloodhunters are on the starboard side and closing in fast," Angel called. Just as she gripped her controls, the hunters suddenly spasmed and began to drop from the sky like stones. Arrows from their allies below had protected them. She blew an impressed whistle as the last hunter fell harmlessly to the ground. "Remind me to buy Rake a dinner." "At the end of all this, we'll all deserve more than a few meals," Ockran countered as he swiveled to focus on Angel. "Everything all right over there?" She nodded vigorously, but kept her eyes on their scanners. She had dealt with limited battle situations outside of the Institute, but they had always been a few ships or small groups. "Yes, sir. I'm learning to keep track of many things at once, but I can handle it." Her eyes narrowed, and she called to the tactician. "Reynard, a pack of rot giants has cut away towards a group of mages, 45 degrees west of the northern medical encampment." On it, Reynard acknowledged, and turned the weapons to aid their Sosarian allies. Keep it up, people, Akron called out. We've got a long way to go, but we can do this. A sudden bang, followed by a second, shook the ship's bow, and Akron turned to Angel, who stood dumbfounded. Report, Akron barked. Sir, I'm not sure, she stammered as she replayed the scanner data. There were no flyers near us before the impact. Akron grunted and punched the button to bring up a transmission to the drive room. To his irritation, Dravik was smirking and poorly containing his laughter. Report, Akron repeated his order and folded his arms. This ship is fine, Captain, Dravik snickered. One of those giants picked up a few withered and hurled them at us. But thanks to the enhanced armor, they didn't even leave a scratch. Dravik indicated the readout behind him, which showed the armor at maximum strength. I'll send word if I need anything else. But Tarn and I have the situation here well in hand. Akron switched the feedback to his status reports, and finding everything stable for now, he stood from his seat and approached the main view screen. There were too many bodies to track, and as his eyes became overwhelmed, he shook his head to clear them. Despite his military history, nothing had prepared him for this. How are the upgrades for weapons and thrusters doing? He inquired as he went to investigate at Reynard Station. The Forerunner is a beast now, the young man grinned as his eyes darted back and forth between the view screen and the console. It's performing so much better than I ever expected. I can't wait to get home, upgrade our fleet, and show the children of Alpha what we can do. We'll get there, Akron assured, with a firm pat on Reynard's shoulder. The words rang hollow when he focused back on the screen and saw the chaos rapidly unfolding before him. Cassandra gripped the hilt of her sword. She and her soldiers prepared for the onslaught of blood hunters that barreled down on their location. Just as she could make out the details of their split mouths and eyeless faces, they were brought down by the black arrows of their Treekin allies. She breathed a sigh of relief and turned to the makeshift table she had laid on top of a large stone. The map had few markers, but she had already memorized everything's position from her briefings on the ship. She pointed to a section in the north and tapped where the Forerunner currently held position. Send a detachment of Archblades to bolster the archers and Forerunner, she ordered without removing her gaze from the map. They are doing a damn fine job keeping the blood hunters off us, and I suspect Darkos will be making a major move towards them soon. Saren signaled to a runner to deliver the message. He turned back to his queen and approached her with one eye constantly watching the skies. The healers are keeping the Stonekin defenders in fighting shape. Between them and the Defiler holding the line, the withered are dropping by the thousands. Well done. Next, I want... A thunderous crashing sounded, and the remains of a rot giant nearly fell on top of them. Cassandra hissed a curse and clambered her feet as she held a hand over her nose. Get someone to take this carcass out of here. If I had been a second late, it might have crushed me, she snarled as she kicked its immense body. Saren's eyes narrowed as half a dozen soldiers hauled the remains away. Impossible! We won't let anything happen to you. Cassandra closed her eyes and groaned softly. When she turned to him, Saren saw the fierce gaze of his monarch and the determined glint inside. We need to be ready if it does. If anything happens to me, command of our forces will fall to you. You may need to take orders from Lark. Can you do that? He spat and laughed bitterly at her question. Just as she was about to admonish him, Saren gave a firm nod. I would wear a dress and dance for the man if it meant ending this and saving our king, my queen. Cassandra laughed hard and clapped Saren on the shoulder. If we survive this, I am telling him that one. Perhaps Angel would lend me that blue number from last night, he smirked. Cassandra opened her mouth to make one last joke when more rot giants broke through the lines and attacked. Saren and every nearby soldier dashed to engage them. Then, something slammed into Cassandra's side. She was thrown backward onto the stone table, and a crushing weight landed on her chest. Her fingers clawed at whatever was pinning her, and she fought to escape. My. Such fun we're having, a soft voice crooned from above. She could hear Saren and the others locked in a fight far away. Looking down, her blood ran cold when she saw that it was the body of a Ravager that had her pinned. Its body was littered with dozens of surgically precise cuts, and its chest was cut open to expose the missing heart. As she hurriedly shoved the corpse off, she nearly missed dodging a wicked dagger that sang where her throat had just been. Cassandra fell off the table after freeing herself, and clambered towards her weapon as footsteps crept towards her. She armed herself, stood to face her opponent, then blinked a few times in confusion. It was a Treekin woman, and she wore the black robes of the Conclave. Her silver hair was shaved, except for a thick braid hanging between her shoulder blades. The woman's eyes were filled with cruel glee, and she stood as she slowly spun the pommel of her daggers in her hands. "Who are you?" Tessindra demanded. "I was chosen among all others," the unhinged woman declared. "I am Jita." She lunged forward, and Tessindra barely managed to block at the last second. A swift parry and riposte slashed a hole in the arm of Jita's robe, but she merely cackled and feinted to the right. Tessindra fell for the trap, and Jita struck low this time. Pain hit her like a lightning rod, and the dagger point became stuck between her ribs. With a sickening crack, the blade was pulled free, and Tessindra felt as though her lungs were suddenly crushed in a vice. She fell to the ground, gasping like a fish out of water, and held closed the wound in her chest, which leaked foamy blood. She crawled from her assailant until her back pressed against the Ravager's corpse. To her horror, she watched Jita step over her fallen sword. "After what your people did to brainwash his son, Darkos will reward me handsomely for killing you," Jita taunted as she drew closer. She struck her daggers together, creating a high-pitched shriek that seemed to ring through the small clearing. Tessindra's vision swam as she glanced to the right, where Saren and the Archblades were finishing the fight with the giants. They wouldn't make it to her in time. Her hand moved back, and she felt something smooth and hard. She gripped it and yanked with all her strength, but it barely budged. She coughed, and blood splattered on the front of her armor. "Pathetic," Jita sighed and rolled her eyes. "Poor Princess Taz is helpless without her guards." Tessindra pulled on the implement and felt a slight wiggle this time. The soldiers had won their fight and now turned their focus to their queen and her opponent. Sensing the need to finish quickly, Jita broke into a run. Another wiggle, this time followed by a tiny snap. Tessindra's heart leaped in her throat. Jita pounced and brought both daggers down into her stomach, just as she broke the Ravager's rib free and rammed it straight through Jita's throat. "That's Queen Tessindra, you vile witch!" she spat as her body started to feel numb. Her vision dimmed, and she could tell the woman's body was being pulled off her. She briefly saw Saren's face yelling from the haze, but it was short-lived before she succumbed to the darkness. That brings us to the end of chapter 24. So, Lark had a nice Independence Day style speech before the battle. That was a nice touch. We had Taz raising flags right at the absolute worst time, because, you know, it has to be that way, right? So, we're getting into the thick of the battle. Things are finally, the curtain is raised on the big climactic clash. So we are definitely in the thick of it now. Looks like we can probably carry this momentum through and get one more chapter in before I have to step away. I haven't had a whole lot of time to work on my drink just yet, because this has been just that engaging. So we'll see. We'll just keep on riding this out, right? So, chapter 25. The end draws closer. What will be left when both sides are willing to give up everything to win? The eastern battlefield ran into a wall of curving cliffs that stretched the length of the coast and corralled the armies towards Life's Ever itself. It was pockmarked with crevices and craggy surfaces, and the perfect place for Drossen and his contingent to defend as they harried a group of withered back across the battle lines. As Drossen leaped from boulder to boulder in hot pursuit of the monsters, he caught sight of an Archblade slumped against a stone not far from him. Once within distance, he leaped and flew through the air, claws first, and tore 5 of the rotting assailants apart in quick succession. "Pack leader, watch your back," one of his warriors warned. He whipped around to see the corpse of the Archblade staggering towards him. It peered at him with glossy, dead eyes, and smiled with a haunting grin that sent chills down his spine. The head was lolled onto the left shoulder, barely supported by a freshly broken neck. Drossen hesitated. This wasn't just a half-rotted creature whose features had worn away from decay. It was a real person with a life and family they would never return to. Instantly, filled with resolve, he dug his claws into the hard-packed dirt. He would save this person from a life of undead servitude, and then he would avenge them. "I will not let you suffer as their pawn," he bellowed as he charged. The Archblade raised the sword they had clutched in death and broke into a lurching run. With a mighty overhead swing and a strangled gag, the corpse swung and missed wildly. Drossen danced around his opponent. and watched in horror as the disjointed head turned to look at him before the body did. Without warning, his pack encircled the newly raised Wizard, who maintained its gaze on Drossen. "Let me handle this," Drossen ordered, and his warriors stood down without hesitation. "I owe it to the Defiler to put his kin to rest as he did mine." The monster growled and swiftly shot forward with a speed Drossen had never seen from a Wizard. He narrowly dodged the wild strike and swiped hard in return. As a claw caught into a gap in the armor, the Archblade stumbled as it was thrown off balance. Taking the opportunity, Drossen reared up, opened his mouth, and lunged for the monster's throat. A searing pain shot through his teeth as the heavy sword was rammed between his jaws. His bite had the weapon trapped, but the Archblade had the strength to keep from being disarmed. They were deadlocked. With a hacking hiss, his opponent tried to pry its weapon from Drossen's jaws. With a searing crunch, Drossen felt his right fang crack and could taste fresh blood in his mouth. The fluid hitting his tongue renewed his zeal to end the contest of strength, and he leaned harder into his opponent, putting all his weight against it. A sickening tearing sound filled his ears, and he watched in shock and fascination as the Archblade's shoulder erupted. The muscles and tendons had snapped under the strain, and the arm fell limp at its side. The sword clattered to the ground, and Drossen saw his opportunity. He slammed his claws into its chest, and it fell back with a groan. Slowly, Drossen approached and cast a pitying gaze at the once mighty warrior. The soldier's features would forever be etched in his memories, and he tried to block out his revulsion as he crushed the undead creature's head in his palm. Blood and gore dripped from his fingers, but he could not stop to mourn. The body had not come to life on its own. "Fan out!" Drossen shouted. "Necromancers are nearby, and I want them found!" His fighters broke away in perfect synchronicity and began a grid search of the surrounding area. A few minutes later, a sharp cry came from the rocky cliff face, and with a rallying roar they converged to the source. A Ravager was snarling and twitching as a ball of entropy magic coated its scales. For a normal creature, the skin would rapidly rot away before they died in agony. For a Ravager, the spell did little more than tickle the skin, similar to a bad itch. Harmless, but highly annoying. The pair of necromancers that had been hurling spells backed up into the rocky fissure that they had been hiding in. They were wedged tight and far back, so the Ravagers had to enter in single file. Without looking at each other, a decision appeared to be shared between the two dark mages. In a lightning-fast move, the one behind raised their arm high and rammed a dagger through his companion's chest, just as his stomach was being torn open in turn. They both called out, "My life for power, my body for magic, my soul for chaos!" With sickening cracks, their bodies stretched and contorted as they began their nightmarish transformation. Talon-like fingers stretched and scratched on the rocky surface, creating a shrill sound that pierced the Ravager's ears. They were slightly stuck, but with seemingly effortless movements, the rocks around them crumbled like a sandcastle in the sun. "Fall back!" Drossen screamed, as the Unbound scrambled to reach them. He had read the full report on the monsters, and knew that fighting them would just be a waste of blood and lives. Once in open air, he frantically scanned the area, attempting to find a way to distract or divert the Unbound, in a way to waste precious seconds of their transformation. The pair burst from the rock and screeched in glee as they approached the Ravagers. One of his pack fell instantly, and the Unbound let loose a raspy cackle as it held the skewered body above its head. "Ashar!" a Ravager cried as the Unbound casually tossed his friend aside like so much refuse. "Steady yourself," Drossen commanded, and the warrior stepped back. In an explosion of strength, the monsters leaped forward, claws raised, and made to swipe at the Ravagers in their path. A loud crunch sounded at Drossen's feet, and he gasped as the ground beneath their feet suddenly shifted, almost knocking him over. A sinkhole opened beneath the Unbound, and they howled in rage as they fell into the dark pit. A faint echo was all that remained before the ground slammed shut, sealing them in. The Ravagers stared in mixed confusion at each other. "Kavarn, Guildmaster of the Stone Shapers, at your service, sir," a voice behind him called out. Drossen immediately recognized the accent of the Stonekin, and spun around to see a group of 6 in full armor wielding staves. They all bowed in unison, and the leader pointed his staff to where the Unbound had fallen. "The Defiler and our Lord of Stone sent us to assist you. They suspected you would run into those unkillable bastards, and thought we could be of help." "Are they trapped then?" Drossen inclined his head downward and examined where they had been swallowed, almost as if he expected them to burst out of the ground. "Aye, they aren't dead, but they're so deep it'll take them too long to dig back out." He struck the ground with the end of his staff to emphasize his point. We owe you our lives, then, Drossen said, without hesitation. He reared up and searched over the field. There are other groups of necromancers further out, but we can't afford to wait for you. My pack will bear you on our backs, and we will ride together to hunt them down. We are to let Stoneskin ride us as mindless steeds? One of the Ravagers asked incredulously. Drossen crouched to allow Kavarn to climb upon him, before turning to level a steely gaze at the one who had challenged his order. We will do whatever is necessary for our pack and allies to win the day, he commanded with deadly calm. He locked eyes with each of his warriors, and in turn, each one lowered their heads in deference. The Stonekin carefully took their places on the backs of the Ravagers, and were met with silent cooperation. With a rallying roar, Drossen took off running, his pack close behind, and his target the dark citadel on the horizon. Reka urged Viera to run faster. With a gentle squeeze of her ankles, she hunched down and gripped her bonded sable fur, while the battlefield sped by in a colorful, screaming blur. She and two of her best riders were converging on Beldaz's location. According to Angel's communication, he was in serious trouble. My lady, a Stonekin tank is being overturned. Her best sharpshooter, Griven, called out. She merely needed to think of the direction, and Viera took a sharp left, bounding for the skirmish that was occurring. The tank was halfway on its side, and a rot giant was shoving with all its might. Myra, go! Griven shouted, and his black bonded mount shot forward like lightning. Not to be overtaken by her sister, Viera also picked up speed. Myra hopped twice before she leaped upwards and bashed her massive feet into the chest of the rot giant. Reka could hear bones crunch as it was thrown onto the ground. Clicking her tongue softly, her mount launched herself upwards in the air and kicked the tank as hard as she could. It rocked back and slammed down on the fallen giant, and the engine roared as it powered forward. Then, with a loud squelch, the rot giant erupted under its bulk like an overripe melon, and the tank continued its mission. They could have thanked us, Griven grumbled as he sidled up to her. The tank abruptly stopped, and the gun swiveled around, aiming at them. Griven held his breath, as though waiting to see what would happen. Without warning, the barrel lifted and fired just above their head. The air flared with flames, and Reiko winced as she smelled burning hair. Smoldering body parts fell around her and her riders, and the scent of flaming rot made her gag. She looked up to see a cluster of blood hunters winking away and realized that the carnage around them were the ones that nearly got too close. I think they just did, she beamed, and saluted the tank, now joined by Striders, as they pressed onward to Lifesever. Bit by bit, they were taking the field for themselves. Where now, ma'am? Avara requested, as she pulled her own bonded, a light gray male, next to Griven. We were told directly south of Lifesever itself, Reka recalled, and shifted her weight, knowing her knees were pinching Viera. Her bonded didn't need to say anything. She just knew, after decades of being together, what her friend needed. Viera made a sound akin to a purr, and Reka lovingly scratched behind her long, floppy ear. I'll have to give you a good brushing after this. I'll have to give Myra a full bath. I think we got some of that giant on us, Griven groused. Reka held her fist up, and the three went silent as she searched frantically around the battlefield. The chaos around her was the same as it had been, but she had a new foreboding in her heart. You feel that too? Avara whispered. It's death, Reka observed. Something's happened. Or will happen, Griven murmured as he pet Myra's back. We never should have left the forest. Reka shot him a withering stare, and he quelled under it. Your wife and daughter were saved from the blight that the Conclave created. If you don't want to fight for your allies, fight for your family. Without another word, Reka spun Viera around, and they headed towards the Lord of Stone. As they sped across the field, she caught sight of a necromancer who was surrounded by withered. Entropy magic snaked from his fingers to the soldiers in front of him. They died screaming and writhing as they decayed from the inside out, with many standing back up and reinforcing the undead ranks. His wall of corpses was so thick no one could reach him, and so the soldiers had begun to fall back away to regroup. Reka placed 2 fingers between her teeth and whistled loudly to alert the soldiers she was bearing down on them. The crowd parted before her, and she nudged Viera to attack. She felt the powerful haunches of her bonded coil before they were flying through the air. The necromancer paused and glanced up, bewildered at the missile of teeth, feet, and fur headed right for him. Just as he regained his wits and began to channel more magic, it was already too late. Viera landed on him with all her weight, and Reka heard the loud snaps of his back breaking in multiple areas. The withered turned, but before they could converge on Reka, she was already gone and back on her path to the center of the field. Griven and Avara flanked her as they raced towards the target. Vira's ear twitched, and Reka was alerted to impending danger. The warbling screeches above them immediately followed, and they had no chance to react. Bloodhunters attempted to swipe and grab the riders and pull them from their mounts. Griven pulled out his bow and fired an arrow right through the throat of one that had been a hair's breadth away from Avara's face. All three armed themselves and began to shoot at the swirling mass of flying monsters that had closed in on them. "Myra, go!" Griven shouted, and Reka turned to see him sliding off his bonnet and urging her to run to save her. "Griven, don't!" Reka screamed, but it was too late. Myra ran, but it only split the horde above, who had been forewarned of the escape. As she bolted, more than a dozen bloodhunters descended on her, and despite the several monsters they were able to bring down with their arrows, it wasn't enough to save her. "No!" Griven wailed as he sank to his knees. Reka's heart shattered for him, and tears welled up in her eyes. Losing one's bonded was one of the worst pains imaginable. It was like a light was forever dimmed in your mind, and a hole grew in your heart that would never be filled. "Get up, Griven!" She groaned as her tears trickled down her cheeks. "I need you to fight." He stood abruptly, whipped around, and his eyes bore into hers. She saw the anguish inside them, and would bear the brunt of that anger if it helped him stay alive. The three began to pick off the gathering crowd of bloodhunters, but their enemies were endless, while their arrows were not. The gleeful caws and shrieks from their aerial opponents showed they were simply being toyed with. A flap of wings behind her, and Reka turned as a bloodhunter careened towards her and raked its long, putrid claws up her left thigh. She screamed in pain as the bolt of agony almost knocked her off the arrow. She had only one arrow left, and as she drew it from a quiver, she rammed it straight through the hunter's thick skull. The treekin took positions at the points of a triangle as the last two bonded huddled behind them. Reka unsheathed a pair of long, serrated knives and reflexively rolled her wrists to test their familiar weight. More bloodhunters had converged on their point, and she could feel the fear from Avara and the pain from Griven. She shifted her stance and grit her teeth as her wound tore open more. It would need a healer soon. She could already feel the stinging tingle of infection setting in. Sensing weakness in their opponents, the hunters dove as a unit with claws unfurled. Reka deflected the first swipe, but missed the second, a glancing blow on her cheek. Any higher, and she'd be missing an eye. Avara squealed, and Reka knew she'd been hit as well. She pushed the pain and fear from her mind and took on an aura of calm. She fell into a dance of talons and blades. Their opponents were dropping, but also shoring up their numbers just as rapidly. She had no idea how long she'd been fighting. Her arms felt ready to fall off, and her body was littered with dozens of gouges and gashes. "Reka!" A familiar voice shouted, and a wave of essence magic struck the bloodhunters. Most crumpled to the ground, but a few managed to break formation and fly off. She stumbled backward and felt the soft, velvety fur of Vira cradling her. "Reka!" the voice repeated, and she looked up to see Lark standing over her. His hands were wrapped in the white glow of essence magic, and she felt the wounds on her body close one by one. She groaned loudly when he reached the one on her thigh. It burned as though it was filled with acid, but the pain was gone within seconds, and only a thin scar remained. "Are you all right now?" Lark began before an arrow was leveled at his face. "It's your fault!" Griven snarled, his eyes wild with rage and agony. "Griven!" Reka barked. "Stand down!" "No!" Griven shouted. "It's his fault Myra died. Him and this accursed war. Why did you have to pull us into this?" Lark held his hands open and away from his weapon, standing slowly to meet the treekin's hateful gaze. "We're fighting this war so no one has to lose family and friends, or bonded to the Conclave ever again," he replied solemnly. He was unfazed by the trembling hands that held the bow. "Hate me, if it helps you, but save killing me for after we win." Reka and Avara held their breaths and watched between the two men. Finally, with a dejected cry, Griven lowered his bow. Reka strode forward and took the weapons from him. "You and Avara head back to our main forces by the Forerunner. Lark and I will continue on." Without another word, Griven climbed on Avara's bonded, and with one last devastated glance at Myra's body, they were off. "Is he going to be okay?" Lark asked, as the other treekin disappeared amongst the troops. "I don't know," Reka admitted. "A rider whose bonded is violently killed has a high chance of hurting themselves. Even under the best circumstances, they never fully recover from the heartbreak." Lark furrowed his brow and knew he would feel the same way if Angel was taken from him. Realizing he was losing himself in the tangle of dark thoughts, he vigorously shook his head and shouted, "Let's go!" He climbed into his strider as Reika got atop Viera. Without another word, they took off towards their ally. The Sosarian healer grunted in frustration as she wrested a very angry Beldaz back onto the stone slab that served as her medical table. "Please sit still, my lord. If I don't do this right, your bones won't knit properly, and you will need weeks for them to heal naturally," she implored. This was the second time he had tried to end his healing prematurely. "Damn it all, if I don't care about my arm. Chop it off if you have to," he shouted, but eventually relented when the woman channeled her magic to fix his pulverized limb. Rillan stood before him as a barrier. After watching the healer try and fail to wrangle her leader, she decided to intervene. "My lord, you need to stay put. Otherwise, you'll be useless to us, and I'll have to lead our forces," she goaded. "Insubordinate, the lot of you," he grumbled, but finally allowed the healer to finish her work. He watched his dwindling company of defenders as they barely held against an intense magical onslaught. 6 rot giants, backed by necromancers, had proven to be an impenetrable wall, and he had already lost 3 tanks and over 50 soldiers to them. Now, more withered, rot giants and blood hunters were coming to the necromancers, who served as a beacon. He and his troops had been forced to retreat, defend, and retreat more as they lost ground to the pressing conclave forces. After losing the last three soldiers, Calder appeared and helped stabilize their front line. They were holding out, but ultimately trapped between the conclave forces in front and a natural trench line behind. They needed more reinforcements, and they needed them immediately. Calder stood in her bipedal form as she watched the battle unfolding near the tower. "I don't know what is taking the pack leader so long," she admitted, voice laced with anxiety. "He said he would be here soon. Something must be holding him off." "Are you going to search for him?" Beldaz asked, flexing the fingers that finally had sensation return to them. "No. My orders were to stay and wait for their arrival," Calder replied firmly, as her eyes frantically scanned the field. After several agonizing minutes, the healer sighed and pulled away. "It's the best I can do for now." Beldaz grunted in thanks and donned his battle armor. Lights in the metallic frame blinked as the armor resumed its functions. Red lights flared along the left's chest and what remained of the armor's left arm. Gusts of steam from the piston joints hissed and whirred to life as they enhanced his movement. He stretched out his left arm. There was still some numbness, and he could clearly see pink skin peeking out from holes in the armor, but the limb still functioned, and it could lift a weapon. That was all that mattered to him. "Unless Drossen shows up right now, we won't last that long," Beldaz admitted solemnly as he stood before the young Ravager. "The necromancers know they have us pinned down, and they're calling for reinforcements, and it's only a matter of time before my defenders are broken by those giants." His eyes narrowed as another stonekin collapsed under the might of the undead. "Calder, if I give you an opening, do you think you can go after the spellcasters?" Calder balked, her eyes wide. "I wouldn't be able to kill all of them. 1 or 2 perhaps, but the rest would recover and then come after me." "And you're Drossen's best scout and runner." Beldaz picked up his large battle axe as he spoke and slung it over his intact shoulder guard. "Yes, Lord Beldaz," she answered, head dipped low. "My defenders will create an opening through the big rotters. You go and do as much damage as you can safely, and it might buy us the time we need. Can you do that for us?" he pleaded, not bothering to hide the desperation in his voice. The Ravager enthusiastically agreed before shifting to her bestial form. She wove through the line of exhausted defenders and disappeared into their ranks. Beldaz strode up to the front line, picked up the shield of a fallen ally, and struck it hard with his weapon. It rang loud, and his soldiers all focused on him, eyes filled with renewed resolve. "Defenders, fight as one!" his voice bellowed over the field. "Die as one!" the remaining stoneskin cried in response, as they moved into formation and marched to the rot giants. The monsters swayed and stared at them with milky white eyes, unaware of the threat approaching them. Entropy magic shot from between the giants and struck the stoneskin soldiers, knocking shields aside and erupting armor components. Another 2 fell, leaving a mere 32 of the previous 100 in the company. Beldaz swore loudly and roared a bellowing cry as he broke into a charge. His troops rallied, and as a unit, they descended on the monsters. Beldaz hacked deep into the leg of the closest giant. It stumbled and fell, colliding into its neighbor, who immediately shoved it aside and sent it sprawling on top of another of the Stonekin fighters. Beldez snarled, and a high-pitched screech in his ear staggered him. He didn't have time to turn before talons were digging into his armor and attempting to pry him out of it. "Blasted monster, get off!" he barked as he spun with his axe. He caught the blood hunter square in the chest, and blood sprayed from the wound. Beldez sputtered as the black ichor got into his beard. And with a last solid strike, he cleaved the head of the hunter from its shoulders. Another impact from behind sent Beldez sprawling face down on the ground. He looked up and peered through the pain and dust to see a rot giant wielding the trunk of a dead tree as a weapon. When it wound up a strike, Beldez braced himself for what he believed to be the last moments of his life. A flash of brown and a boom like thunder sounded above his head. He blinked several times as he realized he was looking at a ceiling made of fur. Another boom, and the rot giant crumpled with its chest caved in down its spine. The fur turned right side up and landed on his side. And to his amazement, he saw Reka sitting astride her little baby crib. "Not going to sleep on us now, are you, old man?" Reka teased. His jaw had dropped. He almost didn't notice the hand being extended to him. As he was hauled up, his mind reeled from the shock of seeing his allies. "Saren?" he asked, with raised eyebrows. "In the flesh," the leader of the Archblades answered. "We heard the call, and I brought the rest of my group with me." "The more the merrier," Beldez exclaimed, as he patted the Sosarian on the shoulder. A howling roar erupted from behind the rot giants, and the defenders burst out cheering as Drossen tore out the throat of the necromancer who had been causing the most damage. Calder was by her pack leader's side, and the two quickly dispatched the remaining dark mages. Just as Saren stepped forward, a sword drawn, to square off at the last two rot giants, a blur shot past him, and Lark fired a burst of essence magic right from Rebel's heart, knocking them off their feet. He leaped onto one, and with a glowing slash, the giant's head was severed with a satisfying sizzle. Drossen and the remaining defenders made short work of the last giant, and with that, the battle didn't feel as hopeless. "Show off," Saren remarked and shook his head. "And a fine show at that," Beldez laughed, and embraced his young friend when Lark rejoined the group. "Where's Cassandra?" Lark asked, as he glanced around, confused. All eyes fell to Saren, who stared to the ground quietly, and he reported, "It doesn't look good." It was as though someone sucked the air out of the world, as each leader stared at the others in shock. One by one, they all turned to focus on the battlefield that stretched before them. The remaining forces were concentrated at the front of the entrance gate. Lark observed the sea of undead around them, and the blood hunters that once again blotted out the sky. "What should we do, Lark?" Reka asked, her head tilted curiously. "It's your call, lad," Beldez encouraged. A spike of doubt pierced Lark's heart. He purged it from his thoughts and forced a determined expression on his friends. "Beldez, focus your remaining men on the Withered. There are a lot of them, but they're no match for your battle armor. Drossen, you and the Ravagers find any necromancers close by. They need big bodies or lots of numbers for protection, so search there first. Get in and get out. They've seen what we're capable of, so stop and return here if they start drawing you further into the field. I want them to come to us this time. Saren, split the Archblades. I want half with Beldez's defenders to heal and reinforce. Then I want you to take the other half and focus solely on rot giants. Keep them off Beldez as long as you can. We've killed most of their creatures, and they're desperate to try and break us here." "What about me?" Reka inquired, folding her arms. Lark chuckled dryly and pointed to the span of the field between them and Lifesaver. "I want you and Viera to go do what you do best. I want you to tear across the field as fast as you can and create as much confusion as possible." The young Treekin's eyes widened and glimmered with excitement. "Yes, sir!" she exclaimed. As they formed a line and prepared themselves for the final assault, Beldez quietly asked, "What about those blood hunters? We have no archers here." "No, but we have Reynard." Lark smirked and tapped on his armlet. "The rest we'll just have to take care of the old-fashioned way." The enemy line swelled towards them and threatened to burst like a bubble. Lark raised his sword just as he had done many hours before, and as he lowered his arm with a wordless shout to charge, both sides exploded. He and his former captain ran shoulder to shoulder, with a rot giant using the corpse of a blood hunter as a flail. He neatly dodged to the right, while Saren went to the left. Each man spun and cut the giant off at the knee, and as it toppled backward, they both stabbed it through an eye in unison. With a slight nod to his new leader, Saren broke off to heal a Stonekin who had been pulled from beneath a boulder, while Lark went to repel a group of Withered that was closing in on the Stonekin's back lines. Adrenaline coursed through Lark's veins as he ran for a giant with 4 of Beldaz's defenders pinned. It slammed down its fist, and with a tortured cry, 2 of the defenders screamed through blood-filled mouths before going still. "No!" he shouted, and attacked the giant with a flurry of strikes. His blade glowed white, and the cuts crackled as his essence magic began to disintegrate the monster. With a single upward swing, the rebel's heart cleaved the giant in half, and it fell with a sickening splatter. "Lark!" Reka shouted, and he glanced up to see her waving frantically, with a group of over 50 with her, bearing down on her and Vieira. "Get behind me," he ordered. He dug his boots into the ground to stabilize himself. Vieira sailed by, and the horde shortly followed him. He whirled the blade around him, and sent waves of magic with each slash. The withered dropped like stones, and quickly the group was whittled away. "Death to the Defiler!" His voice crowed from above. He looked up in time to see a necromancer flying on the back of a blood hunter. She was the beginning of the swarm that now careened wildly toward him and his allies. She sent a bolt of entropy magic at his chest, but he deftly avoided it. The woman's face contorted with uncontained rage. Clark snorted with laughter before raising his armlet to his mouth. "Reynard, fire!" A series of blasts shot from the bow of the Forerunner. It swept the skies, and in an instant the necromancer and most of her minions were turned into vapor and ash. The remaining blood hunters suddenly began to flee, and all around them the undead receded like a black tide. Beldaz was on the western front, and salvos from the Sonekin tanks pelted the retreating forces. Drawson and Calder allowed the last necromancer to slip away as they turned to go back to the front lines. "The Conclave's forces are retreating to Lifesaver," Calder exclaimed. "You know what that means," Drawson responded. "We need to get as far away from the castle as possible. Ravagers, carry any that are too wounded to walk." As the remaining survivors gathered, Lark's voice called out across their communication devices. "All forces, pull back, away from Lifesaver." And that brings us to the end of chapter 25. So, this is the second big battle we've seen in the book so far. The first was the siege at the Stone Talons, and then we had the great place for a break indeed. And then this one is the big climactic showdown. This one felt a little bit more personal. I think the way the author broke it up into a bunch of small skirmishes and engagements really helped a lot with this one. We didn't get like the bird's eye view that we had in the first one. And that can be a lot of times the bird's eye view of the whole battle is with the hundreds of thousands of bodies milling about is just too much to take in, and you can't really visualize it. So chopping it up into individual battlefields, in small skirmishes and quick struggles works really well for this sort of thing. You still have the scale of how big it is. There's things happening all across the battlefield, and you jump from character to character, and like you kind of follow some line between, but it carries the sense of scale, but also keeps it really up close and personal. So this turned out really nicely. Each of this showing how each of the different factions fight was really great. The bonded and the treekin were interesting. It calls to mind like the Dragon Riders of Pern, how they're bonded to their mounts, and when they lose one, it just like leaves a hole in them, or like the Aes Sedai and their warders in Wheel of Time. So it kind of has the same sort of vibe. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you were going for, or if you referenced either of those, but that's kind of the idea I got from those. So when Myra died, you can kind of understand and feel how her rider was just like ripped apart. So, okay, I don't want to dig too much into that. I do need to step away for a moment. I'm running awfully dry here. So we're going to take a quick break. I will let you guys chat amongst yourselves if you care to. I won't keep you. And then we'll be back in just a few minutes. I'll catch up, and then we'll get ready, probably get another chapter in tonight. We're getting awful close to the end, so I do want to save some for tomorrow. So we'll decide what we want to do when we get back. So I'll be just a little bit. Thanks, guys. Okay. Okay, yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. One more chapter is probably going to be about perfect for night, just for the timing and for the natural break. It definitely helps that, yeah, Akamos, as you say, a little bit of no spoiler hints about what's coming is just what the doctor ordered. So, oh, actually, shoot, I guess there's only 2 chapters left anyway. So we're we're pushing. So, we'll go ahead and get back into it. We will get one more chapter in tonight, a little bit of discussion, and then we will come back together tomorrow for presumably a short stream, but we will get the last chapter in and have some discussion about the book. So, we've got something to look forward to wrap up the weekend, and we will end tonight on a high point with one more chapter, and we'll get things going. From the way the last chapter ended, we are looking to start this one off with a bang. So, let's go ahead and kick right back off with chapter 26. I always knew it would come to this. No matter how much I prepared, I still wasn't ready. I never could be. All forces pull back away from Lifesaver. Lark's words rang clear through each section of the Forerunner. That's the signal, Akron announced as he carefully watched the view screen. Lauren, take us up a safe distance away. Renard, wait for half of the Conclave's army to be inside or beside the castle, and then tell us when it's time. He leaned down and pushed a button to open a direct comm line. Dravik, get over here and help me arm the neutron charge. I almost can't believe we're using one, Lauren breathed, her eyes glued to their forces, who raced to leave the deadlands surrounding the castle. I know. It felt like it was inviting trouble to bring them along, so I nearly didn't. Remind me to thank Tarn for convincing me, Akron stated solemnly as he approached the lone console on the port side of the bridge. Dravik entered, breathing heavily from exertion as he hustled over to stand beside Akron. Is it loaded? Akron asked as he began the sequence. Tarn got her in all by himself when we heard Lark calling for a withdrawal, Dravik panted as he mopped the sweat from his brow. In precise order, Akron and Dravik entered the commands into the console, and with each successive one, the computer beeped and then trilled a warning. The bridge went dark before a soft red light flared on to illuminate the space, while a low alarm wailed to alert the ship. The final confirmation of the launch hung in the air as the two officers watched each other, anxiously waiting for the command to fire. Think this'll work? Dravik asked quietly. Almost certainly. They have no way of knowing about the neutron charges, and we haven't used any essence-infused technology against them yet. So they should be caught completely unaware, Akron answered, his heart pounding despite his confident tone. And the bomb really has essence magic, like Lark uses? Dravik's voice had a tinge of doubt and anxiety. Akron motioned to Angel, who looked up from her console. She clasped her hands together to keep them from trembling and said, I was there when we applied the energy frequency, and he used his power to confirm. She took a deep, grounding breath and continued. I've tested the device over a dozen times since then, and I know for a fact that it will work. As far as what it will do to the castle, we'll have to see. She turned her attention to the dark castle on the screen. We're about to find out, Reynard yelled. Fire! Akron and Dravik simultaneously entered their respective commands. The alarm blared high, and before long, the ship shuddered as it ejected its charge. A tiny, brilliant orb flew through the air before colliding with the base of Lifesaver. All hands brace! Akron shouted through the ship's communication system, and the bridge crew gripped their stations. The bridge was flooded with white light, causing everyone to shield their eyes. A distant rumble drowned out all other noise, and the floor beneath them rocked hard as the shockwave hit the Forerunner. Angel was the first to recover her senses as she blinked for her eyes to clear. It's so much more than I expected, she stammered. On the view screen, where the fortress once stood, a huge crater was in its place. A series of chaining circles around the base led deep beneath Lifesaver's towers. Most of the openings had been a network of chambers and corridors, now stuffed full of corpses and rubble. A flicker caught the crew's attention as a shiny metal craft flew up from the depths and shot up through the atmosphere. The barrier's down, Dravik cheered. Be that as it may, that's a conclave vessel, Reynard. Reynard, shoot it down. I don't want it to leave the planet, Akron ordered. There's some kind of interference, Reynard growled as he failed to acquire the target. It's as though it has a shifting electrical signature. The weapons can't lock on. Sir, something seems to be happening, Angel called out. Steel gray clouds swirled above the battlefield, whirling like a vortex, and the epicenter was above the heart of Lifesaver. The vessel was now long out of sight. Report, Akron ordered as he went to his seat and studied the readouts on his console. It looks as though the Treekin's magic is worn off, but there are no entropy signatures on the battlefield that we can detect, she replied. Status on our allies, he inquired. The blast radius was 12% bigger than projected, but the army was still able to be out of range. I don't think we caused any casualties, she beamed. Good. I want to get a hold of Lark and see what we do next, Akron instructed. Before anyone could respond, a twinned black bolt of lightning shot from the ruins and obliterated a pair of Stonekin tanks. All attention turned to the source of the blast, and with a quick magnification, everyone's heart plummeted at the lone dark figure wielding a massive black sword. Darkos survived, Angel whispered. Not for long, Reynard yelled as he fired. Blasts seared through the air, but a massive ghostly sphere enveloped the area around Darkos. And the energy dissipated like water vapor. Spurred into action, the army let loose their might on the Conclave's leader. Arrows rained down on him, magic of all types was volleyed, and tanks fired as fast as they were able. All attacks proved useless, and his ominous laughter echoed across the Deadlands as he resumed his assault. Everyone, cease fire! Lark's voice came out over the comm system once more. Get out of his range and heal the wounded. I'll finish this. The Forerunner rocked from a large bolt of entropy magic tearing across its aft hull, and Akron gave the command to fall back. Lark's Strider raced across the landscape towards the shield. It ran aground on a chunk of the ruined tower, and Lark used the momentum to open the hatch and launched himself across the rubble towards his father. All eyes were on him as he swung the rebel's heart. The white crystalline blade shimmered as it cleaved the dark maelstrom of a shield. Without pause, Lark entered, and once inside, it sealed behind him. A warm arm wrapped around Angel's shoulders, and Maya pulled her close. The entire crew was on the bridge now, as they watched and silently wished him luck. Darkos turned to face Lark as he landed a few meters inside the shield. As soon as he had seen the army halt its attacks in favor of retreating, he knew his son would make an entrance. If anyone could get past my shield, it would be you, Darkos mused, pride evident in his face. A peal of thunder sounded overhead, and the first raindrops began to fall, striking the back of Lark's neck. He had not known what to expect when he imagined standing before his father, except perhaps a grand speech and subsequent fight. What he wasn't prepared for was to be standing in front of a mirror image of himself in 20 years. Darkos' crimson eyes studied him with curiosity. His ebony hair had dashes of gray at the temples, and his pale skin was in stark contrast to his black robes. Lark grit his teeth and ground out, "It's over, Darkos. Life's Ever is in ruins. Your armies are destroyed, and you have nowhere to run." His father laughed. The sound was low and rumbled like the storm. "Your efforts are futile, boy. I have survived events you couldn't begin to understand. Even that impressive weapon that destroyed my armies wasn't enough to kill me. You think you've destroyed the Conclave? I am the Conclave! So long as I live, my mission continues, and I will not be stopped, not even by you." Unable to resist his burning curiosity, Lark shouted, "Why? How can you justify all this death? You were a hero once and helped save our people. How could you have fallen so far and caused so much horror and suffering?" His voice echoed with rage among the rubble around him. His father's shoulders dropped slightly as he shook his head. His voice was almost regretful as he replied, "I am a necessary evil, my son. We came here to escape a terrible destructive force, one that threatens all life." Lark cast him a skeptical look, but allowed him to continue. "It is still out there, and entropy magic is our greatest weapon," Darkos continued. "I wanted to unite our world, and others, to wipe out this threat." His eyes flashed with wrathful passion. "But the misguided fools that came to this planet with me said I was a madman. They believed that if we stayed here, cut off from the rest of the galaxy, we would be safe, and the conflict could be avoided." Lark's patience snapped as he yelled, "That doesn't justify what you have done!" Darkos absolutely waved the outburst away. "They didn't listen to reason and compromise, so I turned to war and subjugation. You might hate me for what I have done, but when the lives of countless worlds hang in the balance, it is a small price to pay for survival." Lark struggled to process everything he had just heard, and continued to watch Darkos as he struggled to decide if he was telling the truth. "What is this great threat?" he finally demanded. "No," Darkos snarled. His eyes flickered like embers, and tendrils of shadow snaked around the hand that held his sword. "You will not take this from me. You have already snatched victory from me too many times, and I will not let you steal my revenge." A bolt of lightning struck the ground between them, followed by a cacophony of thunder that reverberated deep in Lark's chest. The time for talk was over. He gripped the hilt of the rebel's heart and took a combatant stance. With a bitter smile, Darkos mirrored his son, and to Lark's chagrin, he realized they were both left-handed. Lark roared and instantly closed the distance to his opponent. He leaped up and brought his sword down in a mighty slash. To his surprise, Darkos did nothing to stop the attack physically, but instead simply stomped his foot against the dead soil. A monstrous wall of jagged bones shot from the ground and intercepted his son. Lark attempted to kick off the wall, only to be surprised by the bones fracturing into hundreds of tiny, sharp hands. Each one clawed and grabbed at whatever part of him they came into contact with. He hissed in pain as dozens of points dug into his foot and crawled bloody trails up his leg, like so many insects. Wincing, he used a wave of essence magic to break them apart and stop the onslaught. He fell to the ground and looked up just in time to see Darkos' sword, soul red, slicing through the air, aimed directly at his head. He created a gust of air magic to send himself backward, away from his father. In a feat of blinding speed, Darkos lashed out and cut Lark's right arm. The pain was unlike anything he'd ever felt from any weapon. The wound felt cold, while his nerves seared like fire. He could barely climb to his feet in time to parry the subsequent attacks. Soulrend was a dark blur of strikes wielded with punishing ferocity and deadly intent. The high-pitched clash of blade on blade rang out against the backdrop of the raging skies. Ignoring his wound, Lark continued to block each blow, thinking that he did not expect his opponent to match his own speed and skills, or even possibly surpass them. Shaking away thoughts of defeat, Lark let his instincts take over. Instead, he matched Darkos' attacks and allowed his mind to analyze his opponent. Essence magic had almost no effect on him, even with the rebel's heart, and all other magical effects were swiftly thwarted. Alarm began to set in as it dawned on him that Darkos had spent centuries perfecting his skills and was prepared for anything he could throw at him. Suddenly inspired, Lark glanced down to the muddy ground littered with the dancing circles of their footsteps. "I'm up here, boy!" Darkos snapped and lunged forward. Lark feinted back, gathered the falling rain into a pulsing orb of water, and threw it at his father's head. Darkos laughed mockingly and flicked it away, only to splutter in frustration as he took a full face of mud flung at him afterward. It was only a brief distraction, but it was all he needed. Lark leaned in low and grabbed his opponent's leg while throwing his shoulder into his midsection. It was a similar move Angel had used against him when they sparred, and it often caught him off guard. Fortunately, it had the same effect here. Darkos shouted in shock and staggered back. He managed to barely not fall over, but he was unable to attack for a few precious seconds. Lark wasted no time and unleashed his magic. His crystal sword was bathed in flames, turned white from essence magic, enhanced by fire. Stone encased his feet and fists to strengthen his stance and grip. He summoned currents of air to force his opponent to stay off balance. Darkos grunted and parried what attacks he could, but he was at a disadvantage and sustained dozens of shallow lacerations all over his body. Many times, Lark landed what he thought might have been a killing blow, only to see that his opponent's body seemed to resist the wounds, and his blade didn't cut as deep as he expected. Lark was so focused on the offensive that he didn't notice the blood flowing from Darkos' wound gathered in his hands and formed a large, jagged blade. Darkos' lips curled in a small smile, and he turned his new weapon over in his hand. As Lark held his sword over his head to strike again, Darkos made his move. Lark cried out in pain as the blood sword cut deep into his side, followed by Soul Rend slashing across his chest. Darkos bellowed as the air around them erupted into flames, launching Lark back. With a sickening crunch, he slammed into a large section of what remained of Lifesaver. Lark's vision was blurry. His ears were ringing, and his mind swam from the speed of his father's attacks. Just as he regained his senses, his attention focused on Darkos to see him charging once more. Almost in slow motion, he watched as the black weapon impaled the side of his abdomen, and he heard a high-pitched crack as it pierced through the dark stone behind him as well. His head snapped back as he screamed in agony. Blood filled his mouth and nose as he choked to try to keep breathing. Darkos growled and glared down at him, another bolt of lightning illuminating the clouds above them both. "It didn't have to be this way, son. You could have joined me and prevented this, but you chose to be the Defiler. You chose to defy your purpose." His father's words rang through his ears as his blood flowed around him, and his mind raced wildly between 2 points. He needed to break free, and he needed to somehow win. "Now your choices have damned you, your friends, and the people you swore to protect," Darkos chastised with a sigh, and his eyes burned with condemnation. The rain poured heavily on his head, dripping down into his eyes. As Lark's mind came into focus, images cascaded through his mind. His mother and father raising him, his childhood spent visiting the other races, and the joy that came from learning about their cultures. His new friends who welcomed him with open arms. Then, at last, to the woman who opened his heart and accepted everything about him. He gazed into Darkos' crimson eyes, the same eyes he'd spent his whole life hating, and without a flicker of warning, he ignored the searing pain of the blade piercing him and slammed his forehead into his father's face. Darkos cried out in surprise, releasing the grip on Soul Rend as he staggered back. Blood gushed from his broken nose and ruptured lips as he shook his head vigorously to clear his vision. Seeing his one opportunity, Lark surged earth magic into the ground and sent a chunk of stone to launch his opponent further back. With a pained shout, he gripped the blade pinning him and yanked it free. Slowly, he came to his feet, heaving with exertion. He considered tossing away the black sword, or even attempting to destroy it, but he knew he couldn't risk Darkos getting it again. He also doubted that he could even damage the ancient weapon. Bending down, he picked up the rebel's heart with his other hand and felt both weapons thrum to life in his grasp. The rebel's heart glowed brightly in the presence of its dark mate, and vaporous umbra caressed the surface of Soul Rend as it beckoned to its other half. He marveled at how, despite being so different, they felt so similar. "Two sides, same power," he whispered to himself, quoting what Angel had said before. Her memory became a clarion call in his mind, cutting through the exhaustion and pain. The sounds of Darkos regaining his footing snapped his attention back to the fight. He was a good distance away, but Lark knew it wouldn't last long. He watched as his father spat a mouthful of blood into his fist and formed another malformed sword. Soulrend surged in his hand, calling to his entropy magic the same way the rebel's heart called to his essence magic. His heart sank, and his stomach churned at the idea of using entropy magic again, but he realized it might be his only chance. Angel's inspiring face came to him in his mind. Your abilities don't define who you are. Your choices do. He gripped both weapons equally, letting the magic flow through his hands. Feeling his power climb to new heights from both halves, Lark leveled his gaze at his father. You created me as a twisted copy of yourself. His voice rang out over the distance between them as he channeled the essence magic into Soulrend. You took away any choices I had. He surged entropy magic into the rebel's heart. Immediately, he felt the weapons respond in kind, magic surging through his arms and body to harmonize within him. And now, I am taking them back! Without a moment's hesitation, he reared back and instinctively slammed the two weapons together. A bright light erupted from the collision, causing Darkos to shield his eyes briefly. When he lowered his arm, he stared in disbelief at the single weapon in his son's hands. The Archblade was reborn. Darkos stood, mouth agape, his eyes wide and his mind afire with attempts to explain what he had just witnessed. He had spent centuries trying to repair the weapon, but each time he was met with failure. Ultimately, he believed he'd never had the strength to rejoin the halves, no matter how much time he dedicated to it. Then, the rebel's heart was stolen, and he wrote the Archblade off as a legend doomed to die in history. But here was his own flesh and blood, succeeding where Darkos had repeatedly failed. Impossible! How could you have the power to restore it? Darkos asked hoarsely, burning to know what he had done wrong for over a millennium. Lark ignored the question. While the combined magic with one weapon before felt unnatural and hollow, wielding the Archblade whole filled the emptiness with a sense of calm and purpose. Both magics flowed freely through his body for the first time in his life. Essence magic beginning to heal his wounds, and, to his surprise, entropy magic empowered his body to function despite the damage he suffered before. He walked towards his father, confidence and certainty growing with each step. With a hateful gaze, Darkos fired dual bolts of sizzling entropy magic. They lashed the ground wildly before twirling around one another and combining into an ebony spike aimed directly at his son. With a fluid swing of the reforged weapon, Lark deflected the attack. The magic dissipated as soon as it hit the Archblade, in a shower of harmless sparks. Drawing more blood from a wound on his chest, Darkos formed a second bloodsword, leaping and attacking savagely with both weapons. To his amazement, Lark separated his sword once more and parried the attack, shattering the blood weapons and cutting a deep gash into his father's shoulder. This time, the blade bit deep, and Darkos groaned in pain as his arm hung limp at his side. His son held both halves in his hands, and they both radiated with the same thrumming gray energy. A chill ran down his spine as Darkos felt that something was very wrong. He remembered the Archblade had been a powerful weapon when he wielded it ages ago, but it was different now. He didn't recognize the type of magic being used with it. Lark moved to strike again, and Darkos attempted to block with a wall of bone once more, but the weapon sliced through it like paper and severed his hand at the wrist. He screamed in surprise and staggered back, cradling the stump of his forearm. His hand had simply disappeared without a trace, and he realized with a growing dread that even with another 1,000 years he could not harness this kind of power. Feeling he finally had the upper hand, Lark pressed the assault against his father. His blows came faster with more precision, and Darkos struggled to keep up. He continued to put up magical defenses, counterattack with blood blades, or dodge entirely, but it was as though the fight had gone out of him. He seemed to be studying Lark more than fighting him. Growing impatient, Lark slashed again and again, spinning around with the momentum of the weapons, combining them to add weight and power to his attacks and separating them again to throw off his opponent and attack from different angles. Finally, Darkos collapsed to the ground. His right leg, left arm, and a part of his chest had disintegrated, and the rest of his body was so damaged he could no longer stand. No blood flowed from the wounds, and his magic was useless to rejuvenate himself. His eyes shone with bloody, unshed tears of pride, and although he was furious at himself and the centuries wasted with the Conclave, it all paled in comparison to the revelation that rocked him to his very core. He had been wrong. His son's potential was far greater than he could ever have dreamed, and it was discovered without him. Without another word, Darkos gave him a single nod and bowed his head to accept his fate. Lark looked down at his father and raised the Archblade with both hands. Closing his eyes, he brought the weapon down as hard as he could and released an enormous burst of essence and entropy magic. Darkos made no sound as his body was cleaved in half and the pieces disintegrated to nothing. He always thought he would have something to say at this moment, something powerful or significant to honor the memory of his parents and his people, but words failed him. His mind was filled with nothing but the shock and amazement of being free of Darkos and the curse of his creation. Instead, Lark sank to his knees as the weight of his wounds and exhaustion hit him full force. The Forerunner landed where the edge of Darkos' shield had been. Angel, Akron, Maya, and Bastion all bounced on their heels eagerly as the hatch doors opened far too slowly. Though watching the battle from the bridge, Angel had screamed when Lark had been impaled, and they all collectively cheered when he dealt the final blow. Last they saw, he was bleeding profusely, but he was alive. The moment they could squeeze out of the hatch, they all ran to Lark, who staggered towards them. A look of relief passed over his face as they got close, and his leg locked, careening him off balance. 4 sets of hands dove and caught him before he hit the ground. The Archblade fell from his hands, and the moment his fingers broke contact, the weapon separated into its 2 halves once more. Absently, he wondered about the machinations of such a weapon, but he had more pressing needs to deal with right now. "We need to treat your injuries right away," Maya exclaimed. She zeroed in on the most grievous wound in his abdomen and began to call orders to Bastion. "I need you to go prepare the surgical suite. We almost ran out of gauze last time, so make sure that doesn't happen again. Get us plenty of silk sutures," and Lark barely listened to the exchange, nor registered the severity of his wounds. All he cared about was Angel bracing herself beneath his right arm and helping him stand. She nuzzled against his cheek, and he heard her take a shuddering breath as she squeezed him tight. "Thank you for coming back to me," she whispered. They led him forward, but he dug his heels into the ground. "No, wait, I need something," he muttered as he tried to pull away. "We'll get the swords, don't worry." Akron firmly grabbed him and attempted to steer him back to the ship. "No!" Lark yelled, yanking his arms free. He fell to his knees and gripped Angel's hands with both of his own. Bastion and Angel exchanged looks of confusion. Maya cupped her mouth in shock, and Angel knelt so that her face was level with his. "My entire existence has been about fighting the Conclave and escaping Darkos' shadow. I never thought I would have a life beyond that, and now I do. I can't bear to spend another moment of it without you. Marry me, Angel. Please." Lark's eyes pleaded. His blood-covered hands shook as they held hers reverently. Angel kissed him fiercely and wrapped her arms around him. She cried into his shoulder and gasped, "Yes, yes, of course I'll marry you." Lark suddenly went limp in her arms, and she cried out in panic as he slipped to the ground. Akron and Bastion grabbed him and carried his unconscious body back to the ship, with Maya and Angel trailing close behind. And that is the end of chapter 26, and indeed, a good place to end for the night. So, the big confrontation between Lark and Darkos was played out. The Chekhov's sword came into play in full force, both halves. So it's all's well that ends well. We ended with the big, happy, probably out of place proposal, but you know what? You just won a battle. You saved that. You didn't do anything stupid before the battle, not raising any flags. You saved that shit for after. Good on you, Lark. So that was a nice climax. The battle scene played out well. Yeah. Hey, he stayed awake long enough to hear her answer. That's a win, right? Yeah. No? Like, all right, got some issues here, all right? Priority 1, kill your biological father. Priority 2, save the world. Priority 3, get hitched. Priority 4, get stitched up. It's these things have there's a sequence to these things, right? You have to follow the proper steps. So we have one chapter left I do want to do that tomorrow. Um, and yeah, you know what? Headbutts, secret tech, always gets you, always just makes it work. So, but the back and forth was really good there. They kind of, you had a, since we first saw Lark use the entropy magic side in the last reading, you kind of expected something to come out. But the way it sort of defied expectations, he didn't just like go in with it and like, all right, channel it through the rebel's heart and go. It held to the point that he didn't want to use the entropy magic. So withholding that until he had both halves of the sword worked out really well. And it raised the tension a fair bit because he was definitely outclassed. Like, it was not even close. And then good old headbutt, swing things around, getting hold of both swords because, you know, it was conveniently stuck through him. So, you know, it was there. I liked the way you had them reconnect while he was only while he was using the essence and entropy magic both. And then as soon as he stopped, they just like came apart, or you could configure them on the fly. That's a really cool like image. Being able to switch back and forth from like a hand and a half sword to 2 swords is really cool. Like, we knew it'd be like from the first point we saw Solrend in the first chapter with Darkos. It was, yeah. We like, since it was like a half-handle sword, we knew it would combine. Like, it just it had to happen. But the way it came about was nice. And you're right, fighting dirty, totally okay. You're fighting like the big bad. You don't need to be all up in the, like, just do what you got to do. And even Darkos pulled it out. Pulling out the blood swords, always a nice touch. So it was the quick transition from the big battle scene we saw 2 chapters ago. Well, 1 chapter. Yeah, this chapter started with the nuke, didn't it? But the big battle scene we had a chapter ago, the huge explosion, the sci-fi porn of blowing shit up, and then the big bad obviously going through it, and I can only assume it was Edura launching into space after the explosion. So, but I'll wait. But the transition was perfect. Yeah, exactly. Big bad, it's okay. Hit below the belt. Do it. He deserves it. So that turned out really well. You're right. That's a good place to end off for the night. The climactic fight was very satisfying. Both the big set piece with the armies, as well as the ship firing off the neutron charge, which was also very satisfying, blowing up the huge citadel in one stroke. And then in the smoldering ashes of the citadel, having the climactic one-on-one was the piece de resistance. It worked out very nicely. So hats off there. So with that, we have one more night of this book. There's 1 chapter left. I don't know if there's an epilogue or anything. My table of contents ends at chapter 7 and then about the author. So we'll find out. But we've got the 1 chapter left. We'll get through that tomorrow, and then we'll have time to go over thoughts from the previous readings. Overall thoughts about the book. Okay, perfect. So we'll get to set expectations for the next book. So we'll sit down tomorrow. We'll finish this chapter. We'll have a chat. Just general thoughts. My thoughts, your thoughts, the author's thoughts, and we'll just have a conversation. See what we liked. See if there's things that we might suggest that may have played out differently, or may just be some constructive criticisms, or just lavish praise. whatever we feel like. There's lots to talk about and discuss, especially since we've got the author around, which is something that we usually are not so blessed with. Usually I'm reading books that are more than 100 years old, so that's not really possible. So we will just have a nice conversation, all of us as we're around after we finish the book tomorrow. It'll probably still be a shorter session. I don't expect that we'll be yapping for an hour and a half to fill the time, because it will probably be finished reading after about a half hour or so. But I think it'll be a good night, and then we'll finish off and have a time of it. So let's go ahead and wrap up here for the night. As always, I think I missed it last night, but the author's link tree is in the description of this stream. I encourage everyone to check it out. That's where his socials are, as well as links to storefronts where you can buy the book for yourself. The copy I got is from the Kobo store. It's a DRM-free EPUB, so you can use it on any of your e-readers, any of your platforms. So there's options on all the major platforms as well. So do check it out. Support the author. This has been a great time for all of us for the past 2 weeks. Follow him on Bluesky. Say hello. And just be supportive. We love indie authors around here. We want them to succeed. So, with that, I will bid everyone a wonderful evening, and I hope you have a great night. And I hope very much to see you tomorrow for the final chapter as we finish up this wonderful book, Archblade, Legend of the Defiler. Thanks, guys!